Hey guys, Prometheus again. This is part two of the grand finale. Here's what's about to happen to you: an economic love story, or 50 Shades of Green. And we were discussing capital controls and financial regulations as part of our evidence of what's kind of coming down the pipe here. What I want to move on to in this video is also what's occurred from 2010 to the present. And that's financial events that are evidentiary of what's about to happen to us. And there's been a lot of financial events that have caused economists and traders around the world to false start and then false start again on predictions of doom. But all of those events have seemingly been blown away by this massive bull market in the United States and China. Traders and economists have been complaining ad nauseum that these markets just don't seem to have any relationship anymore to the actual economic environment. And they're right. These markets are wholly bought out with the massive printing of electronic fiat dollars by these monolithic financial institutions associated with the Federal Reserve Bank, and they're fully controlled by high-frequency computer trading algorithms. The equity markets and any other fractional reserve markets, such as precious metals, bear no relationship to the economy anymore. And despite, all these quantitative easing cheerleaders on TV and in the financial forums, that's just the facts. There's been a lot of events in the financial world that have transpired over the last 2 or 3 years that were signals of impending crisis. So many that I really don't have time to go over all of them, and you probably don't have time to listen to me go over all of them. So I'm going to choose three recent events that have been really large signals to me of what's about to come in the global economy. First off, Cyprus. We talked about Cyprus a little in part one. And as I stated before, Cyprus was sort of a test run of these new financial regulations of the European Union in much the same way that MF Global was in the United States. But it was also a signal to those in the know that it's time to start getting your money out of these banks. I won't go over it again, but rest assuredly, Cyprus was a major recent economic signal. The second signal I want to talk about was the orchestrated takedown of precious metals back in April. This was a move that may well have backfired on the financial cartel or financial cabal, as some people call it. In a sense, in seeking to take down the level of precious metals to allow for more inflation of those same metals later on, when it's needed to expand a currency that they decide to back with those precious metals, say. They also sought to transfer the remaining private ownership, or the vast amount of the major private ownership of these metals, from what we in the financial world call weak hands to strong arms. And it started with the talking heads on CNBC and in the Wall Street Journal trashing gold and silver as an investment for almost 2 months leading up to the crash. And then it culminated with Black Friday in the commodity pits. But what they never expected, I don't think they expected the stackers to use that opportunity to load up on metals. They didn't really expect, I don't think, the physical market to stabilize and then push the paper market higher again. And they might not have even expected this immediate disconnect of spot price in relation to physical price that's happened and still happening, over a month later now. Because we're still seeing huge premium spreads in the physical markets. What they wanted to do with this was really serve the purpose of loading up the bond market and derivative markets, putting them on tenuous footing, and it allowed for the banks to load up on these physical metals at a cheap price for compliance with those Basel III capital requirements that I talked about in part one. But unfortunately for the cartel boys, they may have sacrificed the COMEX, and the COMEX is their controlled price discovery system for precious metals, in the process of this transaction. I don't think it'll matter much to them in the long run, though, because the COMEX was dead the moment this plan was put into place. All all fractional reserve markets were dead the moment this plan was put into place. So this move in precious metals was another huge signal of what's to come. And I think if you'll bear with me as we move through these videos, we're going to tie this all together. So the third financial event that was a huge signal to me and is ongoing and really big in the news right now is the ongoing bond implosion in Japan. Now, remember, I wrote this back on May 13th, 10 days before the Nikkei crashed on the 23rd of May. So this bond implosion is a financial story that's still developing, and it's progressing at a rapid rate. Japan's the most leveraged country in the world, 250% debt to GDP. So their economy has been constantly under control of this financial cartel slash cabal and virtually stagnant for 20 years now. Japan's been ripe to fall off of this tree for a long time, so it only makes sense that any bond or derivative market collapse would begin in Japan. Japan is leading in the race to the bottom of the currency degradation uh, wars and the currency wars, if you will. And they're the trigger that's going to cause the debt markets in Europe to implode. And then shortly after, the debt markets in the United States of America. I've been saying for a couple of years now, really, and I still say it. If you want to know the timing of all of this financial gloom and doom, just watch Japan. They're the big domino that's going to speed this process up. I think the dominoes have been falling since 1913 when you look back at this objectively, but Japan is going to be the acceleration point that's going to just rocket us to the end and over the financial cliff. So while there's been a lot of financial events that have transpired over the last 3 years that are slowly leading us to this cliff of financial oblivion that we now stand at the precipice of, these three events that I've discussed alone are enough to help us with the conclusion that we're going to reach. The next section of this essay was the Hegelian part of this, the problem, reaction, solution, a Hegelian love story. So, you listen to what you've heard so far and you say, fine, you've shown us a bunch of individual and apparently unrelated pieces of evidence of economic disaster, but, we're still here, we're still standing despite everything. Well, this is where we're going to begin to tie it all together. You see, the economic world moves in cycles, just like everything else in the universe. And when we were using a more modified Austrian model of economics, our economies moved in about a 20 to 30 year cycle. But after World War II, that all changed because Bretton Woods made the dollar, the US dollar, the reserve currency of the world. And then when that Austrian cycle came rolling around again for the world reserve currency in the 1970s, the financial cartel did something that was going to forever alter the path of human development. They pulled the world reserve currency, the US dollar, off of the gold standard and they replaced it with the petrodollar. And they moved all of the world currencies to a totally fiat Keynesian economic system. And this Keynesian system has its upsides and its downsides, guys. I'm not a proponent of Keynesian economics, but it does have an upside because it allowed for the exponential expansion of currency and capital that was previously only dreamed of in these Austrian circles. It allowed us to expand and civilize the entire world after World War II. It's allowed the growth that we've seen in the United States of America. It's allowed the growth we've seen in Europe. It's allowed the growth everywhere. But what it also does is it allows for the expansion of debt to never before imagined levels. And that's where we're at today. So here's the problem. It's debt. Debt, more debt. More debt's been created under this ever-inflating system of Keynesian economics and its fractional reserve banking than can ever be paid off. More debt exists on this planet than money exists to pay it off. So how do we cure something that can no longer be cured through economic expansion, because economic expansion, that steady rate of inflation, is the only way things are cured in the Keynesian economic system. So it leaves one to ask, how does this financial cartel we're talking about take down this monolithic skyscraper of debt that they've built all the way up to the heavens, but has become structurally unsound at its foundation? How do they do that without taking themselves out in the process? Well, they do it like you do any skyscraper that develops foundational problems. They do it through controlled demolition. Now, what I'm talking about with debt is the real problem, but it's not the problem you're going to hear about on the news. Hyperinflation is what you're going to hear about. Hyperinflation is not the ordinary expansive inflation that we're used to in the Keynesian system. It's not even runaway growth. Hyperinflation is a loss of confidence in the currency. In this case, it will be following an implosion of the world bond markets and a subsequent deflation of the world derivative markets, and the world's going to lose faith in all fiat currencies. Hyperinflation will ensue around the world. Economic premises that we're familiar with, that we're used to, these financial relationships like those of inflation to the growth in equity markets, they're going to become useless and will really work in an entirely opposite manner of the way they worked before the loss of confidence. Because if you can imagine markets, equity markets deflating while the value of a currency is dropping like a stone, well, that's what's happening in Japan right now. Market deflation, while prices for basic commodities and finished products are going through the roof. Interest is being jacked up on a daily basis to try to stave off this ravaging beast of inflation. And if you don't think that's possible, all you have to do is look at the USSR and the Argentinian economic model for modern examples of this time bomb at work. Hyperinflation will be the one and only thing on the mind of every person in the world. And they're going to be beating that dead horse back to death nightly on every TV screen around the world. So how does hyperinflation happen? Many people thought that printing, all this money printing, would cause hyperinflation. And if that money had actually been let loose in the street economy, it would have happened. But the money was tightly controlled by a select few and disseminated into the system through financial instruments rather than loans to businesses. But now the tipping point's been reached. See, we can't grow our way out of this mess with stocks and derivatives, and we can't put the money into the hands of small businesses. All they would do is ravage big businesses and steal their market share. The system's full. The overarching cycles of energy and food production are all moving into decline. And that will in turn move population cycles into decline. So there's simply no consumers left to exploit. The edges of our economic habitat have been found and fully explored. There's simply nowhere left to grow. So without growth in a Keynesian system comes deflation. But they've stalled that deflation with all this artificial money printing for the last 3 years. And it's propped up the markets that long ago should have collapsed under the weight of their own hubris. So the deflation transfers itself to the only place it can. It transfers itself to the credit markets, sovereign debt, bonds. And so the loss of confidence will begin in the bond markets, with the losses piling over into that fantasy world of the derivative markets. These derivative markets are the only place in the world where you could probably find someone to buy an option on unicorn futures. That's how out of touch those derivative markets really are. So I'm going to stop this video here shortly, but I want you to digest what I'm talking about here. That hyperinflation is not really going to be the problem. The problem was the debt. The debt caused the hyperinflation, but they're going to bring in a solution. We'll talk about that in the next video after they get enough of a reaction. So we'll talk about that in part 3. So please join me on part 3 right now, and we'll go over the reaction and the solution in this Hegelian dialectic. Thank you.